Welcome back to the channel, folks. Today we take you back again to the tip of Lake Superior in Duluth, Minnesota. Current population about 84,000. And this comes to us from Wikipedia. The Duluth Civic Center Historic District is a government complex in Duluth, Minnesota. It includes the St. Louis County Courthouse, the Duluth City Hall, and the Gerald W. Haney Federal Building. The complex was designed by urban planner and famed architect Daniel Burnham in 1909 and constructed over the next 20 years. Today we will be concentrating on what we were told was the first building completed in the complex. It stands in the center of the complex, the St. Louis County Courthouse, completed in 1909. Then we will be looking at the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, built in 1918, designed by famed architect Cass Gilbert and famed sculptor Paul Wyland Bartlett. Famed architect Daniel Burnham, born in 1846, died in 1912. Supposedly he had died of colitis complicated by his diabetes and food poisoning from a meal while on vacation in Heidelberg, Germany. And here are some of his more notable works, and I emphasize some of his works. Hold on to your socks. The Flatiron Building, New York City, 1901. The Reliance Building, Chicago, 1895. The Union Stockyard Gate, Chicago, 1879. The Rookery Building in Chicago, 1886. 770 Broadway, New York City, 1910. Pennsylvania Union Station in D.C., 1908. Wow, look at that. In 1892 to 1893, he was the director of works on the Columbian exposition called the White City for the Chicago's 1893 World's Fair exposition. In the expo, he designed and built what is now the Chicago Field Museum, still standing today. Wait a second, I thought those buildings were all temporary and made out of plaster. Next we have the Masonic Temple of Chicago, built in 1895, 21 stories high. And don't forget, he designed and built the Navy Pier in Chicago. This brings us to the designer of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument out front, Cass Gilbert, 1859 to 1934. He had supposedly died while on vacation in Great Britain at the age of 74. Now, Cass Gilbert has some bangers. He gives Daniel Burnham a real run for his money. This guy, well, starting here, the Woolworth Building, built in 1912, a 45-story building, the tallest building at the time. Built in only 20 months, of course. Check out the inside of this beauty. Looks like some kind of a European castle or somewhere in Rome. Then we have the U.S. Supreme Court Building, 1932 to 1935. Wow, is that thing giant. Then we have the Minnesota State Capitol, 1896 to 1905. One of my personal favorites. Wow, what a stunner. It looks like St. Petersburg. Then we have the Arkansas State Capitol. He finished the project from 1908 to 1915. And the West Virginia State Capitol in 1932. Then we have the St. Louis Art Museum, built in 1904 and designed and used for the St. Louis World's Fair. And last for the bios, we have sculptor Paul Wyland Bartlett. He was born in 1865 and died in 1925. He died of blood poisoning from a cut while he was fishing, also on leisure. Some of Paul's famous works are the Bohemian Bear Tamer and the Indian Ghost Dancer, both from 1893 for the World's Fair. He also designed and made the equestrian monument to the Marquis de Lafayette. In 1916, he also created the apotheosis of democracy, the statues that stand in the House of Representatives portico. Now we turn our attention back to the St. Louis County Courthouse. As you can see here on the plaque found in the lobby, the building contract was awarded May 22, 1908, and work completed in October of 1909, just over 1 year. With a missing in action architect, as you'll see here, our architect Daniel Burnham was supposedly doing about 10 other projects that overlapped across the world at the same time as this one building was put up in 1 year's time. As you can see, it's built of giant granite blocks and marble. Back in 1909, I'm going to remind you, they were using horse and buggies and still had no power tools. Also, Minnesota winters can be very harsh. Some years, we've had 7 months of snow on the ground. I'd imagine that is very difficult to pour concrete. Not to mention during the winter, there's only daylight for half the amount of hours. Just look at those columns. So according to the official narrative, it took 7 more years until 1916 for the city to purchase the rest of the land to use to complete the complex after creating this building here in 1909. Then it took until 1923, 7 more years, to build the county jail, which is behind the complex, but still considered part of the complex due to its similar style. Then in 1928, we built our city hall to the right, in just 1 year, mind you. And then in 1930, we built the federal building to the left, also in just 1 year. Take a close look at all the detail and the materials used in this place. It is breathtaking. Keep in mind, it only took just over a year to build this masterpiece. As we walk through, I'm going to display all the conflict of interest projects that our supposed architect was doing that crossed over this timeline. The Union Station, Washington, D.C., 1906 to 1908. Gimbel Brothers Retail Store in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 1908 to 1912. The Selfridge and Company Department Store, London, England, 1909. The Ford Building, Detroit, Michigan, 1907 to 1908. Don't forget about the John Wanamaker's retail store, now known as Macy's Center in New York City, 1907 to 1910. And last but not least, Daniel Burnham was city planning for the city of Chicago from 1906 to 1909. So how many places at once could Daniel Burnham be? He had 1 year to build this building, and he had how many other projects going on across the world? So are we to assume that he was absent and that they didn't have any issues or hiccups that they needed to address the architect of the building with? It just sounds so implausible. And reading a quote from an archived news article from a local newspaper, on September 8, 1908, Duluth's Masons led the ceremony for what the News Tribune called Duluth's first step toward the City Beautiful, the laying of the courthouse's cornerstone. Thousands gathered to witness the event, which began with a parade and included a speech from Duluth School Superintendent Robert Denfeld, a Mason himself. Another archived article that I found about the Duluth City Hall building, which is to the right in this same complex here. It's, quote, city officials broke ground with a ceremony on March 28, 1927. Duluth Masons, who took charge of the event, kicked things off with a parade that had Masons from across the state, the mayor, city commissioners, and a squadron of police, and members of the Duluth Chamber of Commerce marching from the Masonic Temple to the City Hall. In that building, too, may I remind you, was built in just 1 year as well. And finally, we take you to the Duluth Soldiers and Sailors Monument, placed in 1918. It was designed by Gilbert, and the sculptor who made the Eagles and the Knight was none other than Paul Wayland Bartlett. This monument features a 20-foot wide granite base, a 60-foot steel flagstaff, 4 bronze eagles on the corners, and a stone knight. The monument features the names of St. Louis County soldiers and the first verse of the Star-Spangled Banner are on the top by the Eagles. There is also a plaque with a supposed picture of Duluth's first mayor, a Civil War veteran. The things I find most interesting about this monument are, number 1, the Masonic cornerstone, and the date of 1918. So May 30th, 1918 is when this was dedicated, and we were still in the final stages of World War I. It seems odd to me that anyone would be looking back to a war 60 years previous at that point. Ah yes, the Masonic cornerstone. And lastly, why did they need those 2 giant names to design this simplistic monument, in my opinion? I mean, they needed someone to separately make the base and the flagpole, and someone to do the sculptures separately. You think that with the genius that those 2 had, they could have incorporated that into one project. Man, I tell you, today in 2024, to get in my recent model SUV and drive to another state is quite an ordeal and expensive, and something I can't just do at the drop of a hat. How did Duluth, Minnesota gather all these famous architects at one time in one place? But apparently, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with it being possible to build giant Roman Greco buildings in record time, world travel was not much of a problem either. Well, thank you for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe.